I am fascinated by the shockwave that follows an atomic bomb explosion, and I want to try to recreate the same effect using the free 3D software Blender, using entirely all the inbuilt functions of the software, which means completely for free. The idea at the base is this: you have a smoke simulation in Blender with a wind that goes from a very strong value and then suddenly becomes negative like that. End of the tutorial. Haha. No, there is much more involved into a destruction simulation, of course. Alright, for the object that you're going to use, first of all ensure that it's pretty simple. With thickness, the last thing I want to check is to basically have enough geometry to work with, distributed all around the mesh, so that basically the fracturing part is going to be painless. Then if you press N, so under item, I want you to use an object that is more or less 7 meters for every side, basically. If you have a giant object, your scene is going to be completely different from mine. So keep this in mind and work in real life scale. Before starting, we need the free add-on Cell Fracture, which means simply going under Edit, Preferences, Get Extensions, and up here, just search for Cell Fracture. There should be a button here called Install. I actually have to update it, so I'm going to update it right now. And I'm going to save Preferences. And just in case, I'm going to also go under Add-ons and under Cell Fracture, just ensure that is activated and save preferences. Finally, we can select this house, and now we are ready for the fracture. So F3, search for cell, and here we go. The first option here, cell fracture. I'm going to change this to own vertices. Source limit, I want 400 pieces, and simply start the fracturing. However, real quick, if you are watching this video, chances are that you like to learn new things like I do, and you can learn literally anything right now on Skillshare, which is the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives and has thousands of classes across literally any topic you might want to learn, like 3D graphics, visual effects, filmmaking, animation, compositing, even freelancing and more. I personally liked some classes like this about Blender geometry nodes, a topic that I always found intimidating and confusing before. Now, why should you join Skillshare since there are billions of videos all around the web, right? Well, what's special is that Skillshare is a community in which you can find not only classes, but also learning paths and one-on-one sessions, all of this with a learn-by-doing approach. Right now, Skillshare has an offer for you. The first 500 people who join Skillshare using my link in the description instantly get 1 month of Skillshare for free. So let's say you do Skillshare for 1 hour per day, boom! 30 hours of classes completely for free already. So join Skillshare today and start learning something new. The next thing that I have to do immediately, so I'm going to do this, try to select on the border until you select the actual house that we had before. Here we go, this one here. I'm going to go here and I'm going to turn off all these icons for the visibility, and I am also going to organize this outliner a little bit better so we can work properly. So the house with this selected, with the mouse here, I'm going to press M, move to new collection that I'm going to call variables, and okay. And then for all these pieces here that we just made with the fracture, we can select all of them, move to new collection that I'm going to call chunks. So we can basically stay organized. Immediately after the fracture, I want to do this. Select one of them, holding shift, select all the others, enter in edit mode to clean up a little bit the vertices. So in vertices mode, I'm going to press A to select all the vertices. I'm going to go in the menu mesh, clean up, merge by distance, and you can see that we had a lot of double vertices, which is something that happens always after the fracturing. We can go back in object mode, right click, set origin to geometry just in case, and then we can finally activate the rigid bodies. So pressing F3, which is the button for searching anything, and look for active and choose the first option here, add active, and now they are rigid bodies. In fact, if you press play to play the animation, you can see they fall down like that. But I also want a floor, so let's make a cube, a very large area like this, and just ensure that this floor is not intersecting the house, so put it down as precisely as you can. Control A, apply rotation and scale so that we have proper collisions. We can also rename this, you guess what, floor, and we can put this in the various collection. And finally, we have everything organized properly. Now this floor here is still not interacting with the rigid bodies. Press F3 and search for passive, add passive. But I want something more realistic. In real life, house doesn't disintegrate like that. So what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, let's hide the floor so we can select properly stuff that we want. I'm going to activate the transparency and I'm going to make a selection like this at the base. So you can see I have selected pieces only on the bottom part. I'm going to press F3 and search for passive again, and now basically everything is falling except the base of the house, which is something more realistic. Now, for having more realistic behaviors in the physics simulation, I can already tell you that we can go here under scene properties, rigid body world, we can increase the substeps to something higher, like 12. And speaking about the scene properties, if you have a timeline that is different from the default, let's say we have 300 frames, you're going to want to check also the cache duration. So also here, I'm going to type 300. The last thing that I want to do is to select one of them, holding shift, select the others. I'm going to go in the menu object, rigid body, calculate mass. I'm going to choose a preset from this one, concrete, and this way we can basically see that every one of them has a different mass in kilograms, basing on their size. Now, if you play the animation, you should have something like this. From now on, all the settings and things that I choose to use are not absolute. You're going to want to play around with settings until you find out which settings works for your specific scene. Alright? Next thing to do is to add a wind that is going to be very strong. Shift, right click something around here, Shift A, adding a force wind. I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees and I'm going to increase the strength in the physics properties. I am actually going to make it very strong. Like I already made some tests, so I can already tell you that the values in this case is going to be 4,500,000. This is a very strong wind. In fact, if you play the animation, everything is going to fly away like that. But if we animate this strength, we can basically get what we are looking for. First of all, I want you to rename this wind for rigid bodies only, because we're going to have multiple winds later. So for now, let's go on frame 70, which is the part in which I want the shockwave to happen. So basically on frame 70, the strength is going to be 0, totally 0. With the mouse over here, I'm going to press I on the keyboard, and this has recorded the keyframe. So this is something that I'm going to do quite often from now on. So just remember, when I tell you record the keyframe, it means this. Let's go now on frame 71 and let's increase the strength to what we said, 4,500,000. Record the keyframe and we can see that we have 2 keyframes. And then in the frame immediately after, which is 72, I'm going to decrease the strength again back to 0. And of course, remember to record the keyframe. And look at that. If you scroll between these 3 frames, now you can see that the strength is changing. Look at that. So we have, first of all, 0 and then 4 millions and then 0 back again. Now, to fix the thing that in the beginning they are already falling down, we can do this. Select one of them. We can press then Shift G, select grouped collection. And this is the advantage of having everything organized in collections, by the way. Let's select the right collection. And then we can go in the physics properties and under dynamics, we are going to change one setting for all of them in one click. And to do that in Blender, it works like that. You have to hold the button Alt on the keyboard, which is pretty annoying. I don't know why it's a thing. By the way, holding Alt, I'm going to activate this function here, deactivation, to expand this. Activate also this function here, start deactivated. So this way, if you restart the animation from frame 0, you can notice that they stay in place in the first part of the animation and suddenly exploding like that, which is exactly what I want. Now I will make the constraints for connecting these pieces together in a more realistic way, basically. So select one of them, holding shift, select all the others. I'm gonna press F3 and search for connect. And this is going to take some moments for generating all those constraints. After that, the first thing to do is to go in this pop-up menu and change this option to chain by distance. This way, basically, the constraints are going to be placed in the middle of every couple of chunks, which is more realistic, basically. And you can see these constraints have been repositioned correctly. But the first thing I want to do is to select one of them and then Shift G, select grouped type. And this will select potentially all the constraints, but might happen that selects also some other empty objects in your scene. So double check that you don't have selected unwanted stuff. Like in this case, it has selected also my wind, which I don't want. So I'm going to deselect this. I'm going to press C for the circular selection. And if you click on the mouse wheel on this is going to deselect this element. And if you have other stuff in your scene, just double check that you don't have selected unwanted stuff, alright? Maybe some rigs or I don't know, some other stuff. So you just want to select these constraints. With all of this selected, I'm first of all going to group them into a new collection. So press M, move to a new collection that I'm going to call constraints. And finally, we have reorganized this scene properly. We can select just one of these constraints and then Shift G, select group collection and choose the right collection. So what I want to change in the constraint settings is this. First of all, hold Alt and then I'm going to activate Unbreakable. And then we also have to play around with the threshold, which is the threshold before these chunks actually break. In my case, I already have made some experiments and I can already tell you that a threshold of 3000 will work for my scene. Make your own tests. Anyway, double check that you actually have changed these settings for multiple constraints, not just for one. And in case it didn't, just remember to hold Alt and change these settings, alright? And now if you play the animation, you see that it looks much better, it's more realistic. The constraints are doing their job. Now, if you want to do some adjustment in the physics, is now the moment before jumping into the next part. So if you see something weird, something that you want to adjust, do it now because we are going to bake the physics. So, I am happy on how everything is looking, so I'm going to go here in Scene Properties, Rigid Body World, and finally we can click on Bake All Dynamics. And this is going to freeze all these physics calculations temporarily in the file itself. So that Blender doesn't have to recalculate the physics every time you play the animation, basically. It's going to be faster, but you have to know also that if you want to make some changes in the physics, you're not going to see these changes updating in your simulation because you have to first delete the bake, make your changes, and then rebake all dynamics, alright? That's why I say, before jumping into the next part, just double check if you are happy about this. I am happy, so I'm going to proceed with the next part. But first of all, I want to reorganize a little bit better this outliner. First of all, we can hide temporarily this constraint collection, just to have a more pleasant view in the viewport itself. And then we can also hide completely this wind here, turn off all of these icons here. So for the constraints, I have turned off only this. For the wind, for the rigid bodies, I have turned off completely all these icons, because basically this way we can create a new wind that is going to have completely different settings for, specifically for the smoke. Look at that. I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees. I'm going to increase the strength like that. This is not going to affect the rigid bodies because, by the way, we have baked the dynamics. So unless you don't delete this bake, this new wind is going to affect only what is about to come in the next part. So first of all, let's have this new wind in the right collection, which I don't see it right now here. So I'm going to press M and move to the Variables collection. This new wind, I'm going to rename it Wind for Smoke Only. To summarize, we have two winds in this scene. One wind specific for the rigid bodies, which at the moment is invisible, which means that it's not going to affect the smoke in the next part. And then we have the wind for the smoke only, which is the one active right now, which actually I'm going to make pretty strong like that. Later we're going to have to adjust it, but for now it's going to be alright. Maybe let's pull it apart a little bit like that. Alright, let's make the smoke now. So first of all, let's select one of these, Shift G, select collection of the chunks. I'm going to press F3 and search for quick. I'm going to choose quick smoke. So about the smoke, keep in mind that everything is going to start to be pretty slow. That's normal. When it comes to smoke simulation, that's a thing. So just be patient. The first thing I notice is that even if we are in solid view, I see my chunks in wireframe mode. I don't want that. So I'm going to select one of them and then Shift G, select the collection of the chunks. And then I'm going to go here under Object Properties, Viewport Display, Display As, holding Alt, I'm going to choose Display As Textured. And finally I can see my house back. The house is finally back. So if you play the animation right now, it looks like that. We have something. The domain needs to be adjusted. Actually, for the domain, I want to change the display as to wire so that we can actually see it always. Otherwise, it tends to disappear. Anyway, I'm going to make this domain larger just at the end. At the moment, we can expand it just a little bit so that we can see a little bit what is happening. But I like to stay pretty small with the size of the domain. You're going to want to stay as small as possible to speed up everything basically, but we need some space, so I'm going to enlarge it a little bit like this. For now it looks horrible because of many reasons, don't worry for that. So selecting the domain, in the domain settings, for now we are working with a very low resolution like 32 or even 64, but this is horrible. For the final result, we are going to want to exaggerate this resolution to something like 256 or something that your computer can handle, so that basically you can unlock all those tiny little details and better looking in the overall smoke. But for now, because we need to play and replay the animation multiple times, we need to stay low with the resolution. So all the way down, activate the bottom collisions so that the smoke is going to bounce on the floor, and then we're going to tweak only these two settings here under gas, buoyancy and heat. I'm going to change both these values to -1 temporarily for now. Later I'm also going to animate one of these, but for now it's okay. Now scrolling all the way down, double check the cache duration. This is the cache specific for the smoke. So let's match the timeline duration here. So cache duration 300 frames, and this for now should be alright. I'm also going to change the dissolve time. So activate dissolve and increase the dissolve time to something very high, like 350, so that basically the smoke is not going to disappear immediately. And this is more realistic. The last thing to say about the domain is about the cache. So for now we need to make some adjustments, play the animation multiple times, many times, make other adjustments. So for now we need to constantly see these feedbacks updating the simulation, and that's why the cache is set on replay. But at the very end of the process, once you are happy about everything, once it's the time to increase the resolution to 256 or whatever you prefer, that's the part in which you will want to change the cache type to all and then bake this smoke finally. But just at the very end, because that's going to basically freeze the smoke calculations, in poor words. So for now we're going to stay in replay. Keep this in mind, alright? If you play the animation, you should notice that the smoke is black, because basically we have no lights in the scene. So let's actually add a sunlight, like here, rotate it a little bit, make the sunlight a little bit powerful, like a strength of 7. Here we go. Should be alright. If we replay the animation from frame 0, should update at some point. If you see some weirdness happening, or if you notice that the cache of the smoke is not updating, it can happen. What you can do is to go on frame 0, select the domain, enter in edit mode by pressing tab on the keyboard, exit from edit mode, and finally replay the animation. And you can see that this is kind of forcing the cache to refresh, to update. It's not anymore black basically because it's receiving some light. Now if you go already in render preview, you can check how it's looking, and I can already tell you that we can go here, render properties, light paths, we can change this volume bounces to at least 4, because by default it's on 0, which means that the lights are not entering in the smoke properly. So let's increase this to 4. And as for the density of the smoke, what you are gonna want to do is to go in the shader editor, select the domain, so you can see these nodes here, and in the shader you can play around with the density of the smoke, which is how it's going to look in the final render. But for now I'm not going to care about that very much. I'm going to stay here. We need to first make all the adjustments that we need. Alright, everything is looking like this for now. It's constantly emitting smoke from the beginning and the density is constant. I want to animate this smoke emission a little bit so that it happens in the part in which there is the shockwave, which is something around here. So to do that, let's go on frame 0 so we don't see the smoke. We can simply make some keyframes in one of these chunks, in the emission values of the smoke settings here, which is the density. And then we can basically link these keyframes to all the other chunks. That's going to be very easy. So let's make some keyframes in the density. Alright, I just finished to add some keyframes in the density of just this chunk here. In poor words, the sense of this is basically that you have a very subtle smoke emission in this starting part, like in the reference video, and then all of a sudden there is a very strong powerful emission of smoke that goes very high and then suddenly goes lower again, and for the rest of the animation it keeps emitting smoke but very low amount of smoke. Look at that. So if you want the exact values that I used are these: on frame 1, 0, on frame 72 0.05, on frame 75 it's 0.9, and on frame 76 it's 0.1, and then on frame 250 it's 0.03. Now I have made these keyframes just for one of these chunks, which is this one here. A smart way for making all of this for all the others is this: select the chunk with the keyframes and then select also the rest of the chunks, holding shift like that. Just remember that this with the keyframes should be the active selection, which should look yellow, instead the other are orange. This is important so that now we can press Ctrl L, link animation data, and this is basically going to give these keyframes to all these chunks. Look at that, all the other chunks now have this keyframe. And the cool thing is that, for example, if I move one keyframe for only one of these pieces, this is going to be moved for all the other pieces as well. So yeah, this is okay. Let's go back. Let's keep this on frame 250 like it was. Now I noticed that we have some elements in the wrong collection. Like if I select this and press Shift G and I choose select group collection of the chunks, it's selecting also some other stuff. So let's put this and this outside the collection of the chunks. I'm going to press M, move to the collection of the varios. Here we go. And now finally we have only the chunks in this collection here. Perfect. Now let's see how everything is looking. I'm gonna press play. The first playback of course is going to be always slow, but from the second one it's gonna be faster. But every time you make some changes, the cache is updating, so this backup being slow. Anyway, okay, so for now everything is looking like this. The smoke is pretty constant and the direction of the smoke is not changing like in the reference. So we need basically to animate some settings in this wind for the smoke. Let's do this right now with some keyframes in the strength. So my final keyframes for this wind are exactly this: frame 69 with a power very low, like 0.3. In the frame immediately after, which is 70, the power is 300. And then we got frame 83 with a power decreased of 5. And then we have a last keyframe on frame 171 with a power of -1. And this part basically will cause the smoke to go back. Okay, for now looks like this. It's exploding and then the smoke goes finally back, like in the reference. Now it's time to add more detail in this smoke. In fact, if you look in render preview, you can see that it's too much smooth. Let's see in render preview how actually it looks. It's difficult to have an idea of how it's gonna look, because for now we are looking, remember, at a very low resolution smoke. It's pretty unfortunate because we cannot have really a realistic feedback on how it's going to look. But what I can already tell you is that to add more details in the final look of the smoke, we simply need to add a couple of turbulences. So let's do this. I'm going to have this collection selected. Shift right click something around here. I'm going to, well, let's go on frame 0. I'm going to add a force-filed turbulence. Double check that is inside the correct collection. I'm going to rename this turbulence big, because this is for the big details, we can say. When we want to break the shape of the smoke so that it unlocks all those tiny details, we need 2 turbulences. So the settings for the big turbulence are gonna be this. The strength is going to be 9. I already made some tests and I saw that this works in my scene. And basically you're gonna want to make some tests, but if you see your smoke going crazily, making crazy curves, that's because of the turbulence that is shaking the smoke too much. So size for the big turbulence is going to be 0.001. I'm going to increase the noise amount to 5, and then I want this turbulence to go automatically up like that, very slowly, so that basically this noise pattern in the smoke is not going to be stationary, but it's going to move actually. So to do that, selecting this turbulence, I'm going to press N. In item panel, I'm going to tweak the location of the Z value. If you click here, we can add a driver, which means just write this hashtag frame multiplied by 0.01. If you press enter, this will become purple, and apparently there is written 0, but if you actually click in this, you can see that inside there is a driver, which is basically, in poor words, a formula that makes an animation automatically for you. Look at that. If I play the animation, you should notice that this empty is slowly going, look at that, because of this driver. So this is an easy way for automatizing animations, basically. I'm going to do the same for the second turbulence. Speaking of which, let's duplicate this turbulence here. So Shift D and put it a little bit apart. So first of all, I'm going to rename this turbulence. Turbulence small, because it's for the small details. And now let's check the settings for this turbulence small are gonna be totally different. So first of all, for the driver, I'm going to edit this speed so that is a little bit slower than the other one. So 0.001 in this case, all right? So that basically, I noticed that the smoke is going to be less crazy basically. So just to recap, the turbulence big 0.01, where turbulence small 0.001. Then for the settings for the turbulence small, for the strength, a strength of 2, the size is going to be smaller than the other one. I'm going to choose 0.000 and pay attention that in Blender there is a weird thing happening. Look at that. If I press enter, apparently my number disappears, but it's actually inside there. In fact, if you click on here, you can see that the value that I choose is still there. It's just not visible when you press enter basically, but it's actually there. This basically will give us those very tiny small details that you're gonna see not right now because the resolution is too low, but you're going to see these tiny details only when we unlock the higher resolution for the domain, alright? So everything is going fine, but the last thing I noticed in the reference is that in the first 3-4 seconds, the smoke is really going up. So to emulate that, if you select the domain and you search for the gas, heat, I have put 2 keyframes exactly on frame 69, which is on 1, and then on frame 70 is on -1. This way basically the smoke will go up in the first part of the animation only, and then calming down from the moment of the shockwave, because I don't want the smoke to keep going up like that. So to complete that effect, we also need to animate something in the emitters. Just select one of them, because by the way they have linked animation data. Now we can find in the physics properties the initial temperature, this one here. So I'm going to put 2 keyframes exactly on frame 72. So on frame 72 for the emitter, I'm going to set a temperature value very high, like 10. I'm going to record a keyframe, and then I'm going to go on frame 75, and here I'm going to set the temperature as we wanted before. So it's going to be on 0. I'm going to record the keyframe, and look at that, double check it. On frame 72 is on 10, and the more you scroll it to frame 75 is going to 0. Look at that. Perfect. Now, because I have made already multiple tests, I know that it should work like this. Of course, you're going to make it better as you want, but let's suppose that we are happy. So once we are in the final part in which we have to understand if everything is alright, first of all, let's enlarge the domain as much as you need, like this here. This depends also on the position of your camera, by the way. You cannot have a domain too large because this is going to destroy the quality. So make it as small as possible, but enlarge it as much as you need. I don't need that space wasted on the floor. And in the final part, you are also going to want to increase the resolution crazily. 256, highly suggested. If you can, even 320. The bake is going to require hours. This is normal. Give it the time that it needs for the final high resolution bake. And then, because it's the final bake, we also want to change the cache to all, so that is going to be frozen. You can also check is resumable. This gives you the advantage that during the bake you can interrupt it and check it, how it's going, and then restart it again from that point. And then finally we can launch the bake in high resolution and go to eat or go to sleep. So this should be fine. Just a last note, if after these bakes you are not able to play in the viewport because everything is extremely jaggy and slow, it's pretty normal. And that's why after these bakes, what you want to do is a viewport render preview, which means if you set a camera first, you go in this menu here, view, viewport render animation. This is going to make a very fast render preview of just the viewport. And this is necessary for just to understand how it's going, how is the speed of everything, if you need some adjustment before starting the days of rendering, you know. So I'm going to launch this bake and call this tutorial finished probably. Yep, you can see that it's extremely slow. I have a 320 resolution for the smoke, but it should be fine. So yeah, that's it for today, I guess. I see you next time. Bye.